Do you know who you are? Your name, I mean. My name? My name is Wally West. I'm the fastest man alive. Today on the Comic Book Report, The Flash by Geoff Johns, Book 1. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm finally taking a look at Geoff Johns' run on The Flash. I have by no means read every Flash run available, but of the Flash comics I have read, Geoff Johns stands above as my favorite run on the Scarlet Speedster. All that to say, I'm really excited to finally give Volume 1 a review here on the channel, so let's get started. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Geoff Johns and illustrated primarily by Ethan Van Sciver. The issues in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2000. The volume itself collects The Flash, issues 164 through 176, and The Flash Iron Heights. And finally, this trade paperback collection is 448 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a brief spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that trade paperback collection. For those wondering, yes, this is book 1 of Geoff Johns' run on The Flash. His entire run is broken across 6 of these books in this trade paperback format. He also has this run reproduced as well in 3 oversized omnibus editions, which I do not own currently. There's also older trade paperbacks that collect a bit less than this here, and you can also find, of course, single issues, digital, things like that. But this trade paperback is a standard size and it has nice glossy print pages. This first book includes maybe the first 2 or 3 story arcs for Geoff Johns' run, a couple other little smaller stories in there as well, so it's a really great little collection for the value. I did actually own a set of the omnibuses once upon a time before I sold a lot of my collections years ago, before of course getting back into comics. I went ahead when I came back. I couldn't really afford the omnibuses, but I slowly collected this whole run again in these paperback editions, and honestly I love them too. Someday I maybe would love to upgrade to omnibus, but these trade paperbacks are really great. I love how they broke them down. These are also available for things like Mark Waid's run, or some of Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run has editions like this as well. Anyway, a perfectly serviceable format, particularly for fans of paperback out there. It is a glued binding, which you saw a moment ago, but again, other than that, a great edition, no complaints. So as we're making our way into the collection proper, as I said, this includes the first 3 or 4 story arcs from Geoff Johns' run. The first arc has a different art style. As we get past this first storyline, we start to transition into the art style you'll see most often across Geoff Johns' run. There are a couple different pencilers and artists on his run overall, but the next artist, which I think is Ethan Van Sciver, you see him probably the most across the run, so there's a very distinct style you'll see. But overall, really love Geoff Johns' run. Like I said, it's probably my favorite Flash run that I've completed, and I really enjoy it for a few reasons. A little bit of context for those that are maybe just checking this out, want to know a bit more about the Flash. This is Wally West Flash, which means you're not going to be reading about Barry Allen or Jay Garrick or any of the other Flashes. This is Wally West. Geoff Johns' entire run, you follow Wally West as the Flash. I know that there are many people that Wally is considered their favorite Flash. Honestly, he might be my favorite. I think he just generally feels like he has a bit more character than Barry Allen. I think Barry Allen can sometimes suffer from the same thing Superman suffers from, which is a bit of the Boy Scout kind of bland character type. Of course, when they're not handled as well. I'm a big fan of Superman, and I do still have a lot of love for Barry Allen, but I think for me, with the comics I've read, Wally West has always felt more like a real person with different layers. He feels more three-dimensional as a character in a lot of the incarnations I've read, so he is my beloved Flash as well. So if you've never read Wally West, I think this is a great place to check him out. Overall, I also think that this is a fantastic place to jump onto The Flash if you've never read it. Yes, there are previous adventures with Wally West's Flash, But starting off Geoff Johns' run, I feel like you can jump right into the title and it fills in all the gaps that you would really need filled in. And you can start just feeling like, hey, I'm starting a whole new run, whole new era, and you can just dive right in. As far as the storyline goes, I'll do kind of a brief overview of some of the main stories included in this collection. There are a few more, but just some of the bigger ones you see. The first story arc is this one in the beginning here with the kind of unique art style. It concerns Wally West traveling into a kind of mirror version universe where the Speed Force does not exist and no one knows who he is. It gets weirder and weirder from there, and it actually has him teaming up with some of his known villains, the Mirror Master and Captain Cold, to try to get out, set things right, and all of that. I really liked it. It's a very fish out of water, what is happening kind of storyline, and in some ways it's a very fun way to start off a Flash comic run because you're just as alienated as the main character as you find your way back to what is the norm for Wally West, what is the norm for this character, and where do we go from there? It is a very topsy-turvy Wonderland kind of dreamscape in some ways. Mirror Master definitely has some trippy things that happen. There's even Lewis Carroll quotes in this first arc, so it's meant to be very trippy by design, and it's definitely attention-getting. One of the next stories involves Magenta, who's sort of an ex-girlfriend slash villain character for Wally West. She eventually gets caught up in this bigger kind of weird cult thing that follows this villain called Cicada. For fans of the Flash CW series, it is supposed to be the same character as Cicada in one of the seasons of that show, but that arc is really well done. This cult kind of follows the Flash, and it's just unhealthy, creepy, and just weird. But a really good storyline. He's a really creepy villain. We also have him facing off with Tar Pit. And then the ending arc, or not even the ending arc, one of the arcs toward the end of this has him battling Weather Wizard. And then we have something at Iron Heights. And those are like the main stories in this collection. Overall, they're a ton of fun. Like I said, this whole collection is just shy of 500 pages. So you get a lot of meat on here, especially for an entry-level collection. I know by this point, when I was reading through it initially, I was so hooked on what Geoff Johns did. I'm a big fan of some of his other work. I know I've reviewed Geiger and the first few issues of Junkyard Joe. I'm not really sure what else I've reviewed yet. I love his Green Lantern run. I love his work on Infinite Crisis and so much of what he's done at DC Comics. And The Flash is amongst some of my favorite of his writing. As far as the art goes in this collection, one of the things I like about book one that you don't have as much in some of the subsequent volumes is that you have a couple different artists changing hands throughout the book. That first arc is by one artist, some of the middle arcs are by another that you see predominantly throughout the collections moving forward, and then the final arc with Iron Heights, that's a whole different artist as well, and I love the variety there. It can sometimes pull you out of the narrative if you're expecting one continuous art style, but it is broken apart on the story arcs, so I feel like I can start a new story with a new artist and be okay. It's not like we're changing mid-story, so I feel like I get a lot of variety of different pencilers and artists without it being too jarring to me as a reader. So as I said, this is book one of a total of 6, and I do think that this is a great collection, but this is by no means the peak of Geoff Johns' run. I think for me, some of the best stuff he does is toward the middle or end even. That's not to say that this isn't a fantastic volume. Like I said, I think it's a great gateway into his Wally West. I think it's a great starter collection for Flash fans, but more of, if you like this collection, it only gets better from here for Geoff Johns Flash. I do want to make a note as well, now that we've briefly covered story and art throughout this collection, I just want to say, for fans who maybe like comic books but have never actually jumped on and read a Flash comic book, one of the things that always sells me for the Flash is how striking the color palette always is. His costume is that bright red and yellow, and the sense of motion. Almost every artist on Flash, almost everyone has their own unique style and visual storytelling to convey that sense of speed and motion and the Speed Force, and almost everyone does it with their own way, and I always love seeing it. How you see fight sequences or just running sequences, travel, panel layouts, all of these things can be affected based on that sensation of motion, of movement, of color, of kineticism, and I think that that is something that has always drawn me to the Flash. I love to see how they depict kind of these tricky superpowers and just concepts. The other thing that really draws me to the Flash is his rogues gallery. I think he's up there there with Batman and Spider-Man for having some of the most lively, colorful, and interesting villains in a character's just whole history. I know that the Flash's rogues, as they're called in this as well, are just so iconic for comic book fans, and this is something that Geoff Johns really helped bring back for the Flash, was the return of some of the legacy character rogues gallery villains. Like I said, in this collection alone, we have characters like Captain Cold and Mirror Master and Weather Wizard, some of these oldies but goodies, just classic Flash villains, and we come to see even more as his run moves forward. We get a handful of newer villains as well, or newer takes on classic Flash villains. And I love seeing that. I think that it really rewarded older fans, but also really encouraged newer fans to still jump into a fresh Flash run while encountering some of the iconic characters. Something else that I think Geoff Johns does that I really loved throughout his run is not only incorporating some of these legacy Flash villains and characters, but really humanizing them. What I mean by that is that he added layers to these villains that were, like thieves and bank robbers and doing all these kind of shenanigan heists, maybe back in the Silver Age, but he gave them creative depth, he gave them just really believable character motivations, he gave them nuance, and I really love seeing that throughout the run. In this run, you get a little bit of a taste of that with the Weather Wizard story, who again is an older legacy Flash character, but you just get to see different sides of them as you see like his relationship life, his familial life, and just how that informs some of his decisions and his villainy. And this isn't even the best it's done throughout the run, but that's just an example in this book to start. In future volumes, you have whole issues that focus on singular rogues. Like there's one in particular that I'm thinking of from this run that has to do with Captain Cold. That's just a wonderful story that follows him as the central character. You get to learn about his tragic life and his backstory and his relationships and what drives him, the kind of humanity of this character. Is he even really evil? He's maybe a bad guy, but he still has a heart. All of these things that it had me questioning about these characters, like the villains in a new light, a villain in a way that they're still a human, if that makes sense. And I really love that about Geoff Johns' run. He made the villains not only kind of a throwback to this classic era, but he really humanized them. He really gave so much more depth to some of these characters that it's easy to gloss over with all the tights and colorful costumes. He gave it a real sense of purpose. And you see that throughout the run. He does a great job of characterization and building to ultimate payoffs. There's also a villain origin about midway through the run that's also just absolutely striking. But we get all of the foundational building blocks for his run within the pages here. Another thing I like about this run and about the Flash, almost in general, is that I would consider this kind of a feel-good character. It's not that there's not hard moments or not gritty, villainous, creepy moments necessarily, but in general, as an over quality, I feel like the Flash is almost always a kind of feel-good title. In the same way, I feel like Superman is often a feel-good title. We have this moralistic, larger-than-life character that's on all these high-flying adventures with colorful cast of supporting characters and villains, and I really don't know how to describe it beyond that. Like I said, it can be deep and layered and dramatic, and there are some dark moments even throughout Geoff Johns' Flash run, but overall it has this quality that it just feels like lighter comic book fare, in a good way. I don't have to read something always as gritty, like noir, dark as like the Bendis Daredevil run, which admittedly is my favorite superhero comic book run of all time. But not everything has to have that flavor. It's almost like in the same way Mark Waid's run on Daredevil was a lighter-hearted, more colorful, just whole feel to the book. In some ways, I equate this Flash run like that, where it feels more upbeat, it feels more positive, it feels more lighter-hearted. And I think that in some ways, it's more digestible or palatable to some. I think that this is also certainly a great gateway comic book for someone who you maybe want to get into superhero comics, but don't know where to start them on like a full run. I think you could do a lot worse than Geoff Johns' run here on The Flash. I think it's very accessible. It's really good for just broad appeal. I think it's a great book. I think it's a staple superhero run and one of my favorite runs in all of DC Comics that I've had the pleasure of reading thus far. I would also say, while I do think the run keeps getting better and better, I think that if this is just not your taste after a few issues into this collection, you may not like the rest of the run. But if this looks like it could appeal to you, especially if you finish this entire book and you think, I really like what I saw here, there's enough here for me to be really curious, I think you could easily be in for the rest of Geoff Johns' run, as it just gets better and it builds off what he's doing here. I think that this is a fantastic collection. Like I said, unlike some of the subsequent collections, we get a lot more artistic variability in this one, so it's a great way to see a lot of different artists just showcased throughout the book. And like I said, you get the first 3 or 4 different story arcs, so really good little collection here and a great start to the run. And now it's time for a grade. For an easily accessible and fantastic starting chapter for one of my all-time favorite superheroes, The Comic Book Report is happy to give The Flash by Geoff Johns, Book 1, a B+. This is a definite must-read for me for comic book fans out there, especially if you're a fan of DC Comics, Geoff Johns, or The Flash. The art throughout is stunning, and the narrative is consistent and very clear. I think the only reason for me that this didn't secure an A right off the bat is just that this run just continues to improve, and there are much more memorable story arcs and characters in the future of this Geoff Johns run. But these early stories are still a ton of fun to read, and I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to start with The Flash. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and until next time, this has been Dominic with The Comic Book Report. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for stopping by. And don't forget to have a good one.